I'm Bill Marler, the proud publisher of Food Safety News and a foodborne illness lawyer for the last 30 plus years, based in Seattle, Washington. The outbreak linked to Gibson Farms, an E. coli outbreak, frankly, a bit surprising. I don't think most people sort of equate E. coli with walnuts. There has been an outbreak linked to walnuts about 11 years ago. There was one in Canada. It was walnuts from California that sickened 14 and unfortunately killed one person. So, there is precedent for it, but it's very rare. The best we know is the CDC reported of April 30th of this year that there were 6 people sick in California and 6 people sick in the state of Washington. The walnuts went to 17 states total, but at least as of the end of April, only 2 cases or 2 states were reporting cases. There have been, of the 12 people sick, 7 have been hospitalized. 2 have developed hemolytic uremic syndrome, or what's known as HUS, or acute kidney failure. I'm representing 5 of the people, 2 in the state of Washington, 3 in California. 2 of the people in California were the individuals who suffered HUS. How large this outbreak is going to be, hard to know. The last reported illness was in early April, the first being in February. So, I'm hopeful that, we're not going to see more. It's an interesting thing that I have seen recently in some of our outbreaks and that have been reported is the outbreaks have maybe been a little more frequent, but they've been smaller. And I think that shows the efficacy and the hard work of public health. I think the fact that we're using whole genome sequencing is a big deal. Earlier, you can figure out that these people are actually connected with each other. It's a lot less guesswork. In the walnut case, they fairly quickly identified health food stores and co-ops as the sort of the point of service, and then link that to walnuts as a common food item consumed by people, and then traced it back to Gibson Farms. They haven't yet found a walnut that's testing positive for E. coli, but that's pretty common. And not to be sort of flip, but people eat the evidence, and that's why you very seldom have food left over that tests positive. So this outbreak was really figured out, like a lot of outbreaks are now, by the fact that these 6 ill people share the whole genome sequence, genetic fingerprint of the E. coli. Between all 12 of them, they all have the same. So we know that the illness came from one source, and that, by good epidemiological work and trace back, they were able to link it to Gibson Farms walnuts in California. Gibson Farms, likely when faced with the FDA and CDC saying, hey, look, the common denominator between these 12 sick people is your walnuts, they tend to FDA, although the FDA does have a mandatory recall authority. They can recall products if somebody doesn't. They usually present their evidence, and usually the company, and in this instance did as well, did a voluntary recall. It was not forced. So the company looked at the data provided by the FDA and CDC and said, it looks like it's our walnuts, and, appropriately pulled the product. There's a long list of grocery stores that are primarily health food stores and co-ops. I think one of the big things that consumers need to pay attention to is those walnuts can then, go to a restaurant. They can go into salads. They can go into a lot of different places. And I think, the old adage, when in doubt, throw it out. If you don't know where your walnuts have come from in the last, 30 to 90 days, I would be suspect, especially in the 17 states, mentioned by the FDA. Essentially, the way foodborne illness outbreaks sort of come to light is that somebody eats a contaminated product, they're sick enough to go seek medical attention, and hopefully that medical provider orders a stool culture test. They can then find that it's E. coli. They can do genetic fingerprinting. That's all done at the local and state level. They then upload that information to the CDC. In real time, State Department of Health, Department of Ag may be communicating with both the CDC and FDA, especially when you've got a cluster of cases like the ones in California or Washington. So there's really, a collaborative effort. Much of the sort of boots on the ground work is done by local and state health authorities. And, the CDC is aggregating that information so they can see it, sort of from a 35,000-foot level. And then the FDA is working, with obviously with their traceback teams and sometimes departments of agriculture within the state to do that traceback all the way to the source. It's always a challenge, I think, people sort of love to shop bulk. They feel like they're getting a better deal. Grocery stores really have to maintain, cleanliness. It's not just, restocking those barrels. Sometimes it's really cleaning those barrels, especially after a recall of walnuts. But a lot of the products that, go into those bulk bins, you really have to look, you know, farther back upstream. What was going on, when the walnuts were being grown? Was there wild pig intrusion in the orchard? Was there deer in the orchard? Were some of the walnuts, fall on the ground and, get contaminated that way? I think you have to pay a lot of attention to, the growing areas, especially when you're, eating unprocessed foods or foods that are, ready to consume. One of the people that I've spoken to doesn't recall, purchasing walnuts at either a health food store or a co-op, but he does recall eating walnuts on salads in the week or so before he got sick. So, that's always a challenge when health departments are investigating. You know, People don't necessarily recall, what store they shopped at or what restaurant they went to, and sometimes, it's difficult. Another one of the clients that I've interviewed, think they bought walnuts at two different locations, so that makes it a challenge. And both of those locations were on the FDA recall list. So, which grocery store it was that they purchased the product, may never be known. The only thing that I think is probably still to be determined is, whether or not the FDA will do a root cause analysis. What was the originating, contamination of that? And, I think it's most likely, given the widespread nature of it being in California and in Washington, it probably was something, in the grow location. And like I said, there's always somewhere there's a cow or a pig or a deer because all of those animals can carry E. coli 0157.